This is going to be the first part of a two-part sequence here on modified atmosphere packaging. So I'm going to be followed by Jeff Brandenburg in the back. And my job here is to give an introduction to you about modified atmospheres in general and modified atmosphere packaging, what they're good for, how they're designed, and then Jeff is going to go into lots of details about how that's applied in the real world of the fresh cut industry. So, modified atmospheres. The first 5 or so slides here, I'm going to just sort of give you background and introduction about why MAP. So you've already heard about temperature a lot already, and I'm starting with temperature again. The reason temperature is so important in fresh cut fruit and vegetable handling is because all of these deteriorative changes that we're talking about are at their most basic level chemical reactions. And chemical reactions respond to temperature. They occur faster at higher temperature, slower at lower temperatures. So lowering the temperatures and processing the products at low temperatures slows down all these chemical reactions that you're trying to minimize in terms of the consequences of those actions. That's because in respiration, the purpose of respiration is to produce the chemical energy that's needed for those metabolic reactions to occur. So when you lower the temperature, you slow the respiration rate down, and you sort of starve those reactions for the chemical energy that they need. That's why higher respiration means shorter shelf life, because you have faster reactions going on. So I talked about the wound response. This is the same slide from my previous talk, how you're trying to also, in addition to temperature, you're trying to do things that minimize the wound response. And that's also affected by temperature, because all of that wounding stuff that I was talking about, it's the same story. Those are all at the most basic level. They're all chemical reactions that are responsive to temperature. So Marita Cantwell gave a really nice talk this morning about temperature effects, but she didn't use this slide of hers, which I love. It's a beautiful slide that shows the interrelationship between wounding and temperature on the respiration rate, in this case of lettuce. So we've got A, B, and C, which correspond to up above the whole lettuce heads, cord heads, and salad cut lettuce. And in addition, we have 0, 5, and 10 degrees. So you see with the intact head, this is the temperature effect in terms of the respiration rate. When you core the head, that's a fairly small wound. You get a little bit of increase in respiration. But when you go to the salad cut, look at this huge increase in respiration rate that you get, especially at the higher temperature. So if you were to process this lettuce at 10 degrees, you would be really compromising its quality and shortening its shelf life, because you'd have a huge burst of respiration rate. The other thing that I want to point out here on this one is, look at the respiration rate of the salad cut lettuce at 0 degrees. It's almost as high as the intact heads or the cord heads at 10 degrees. So you're greatly reducing the respiration rate in terms of going down from 10 to 5 to 0, but it doesn't completely take away that wound response. It's still respiring at a higher rate when it's wounded in the fresh cut process. So this brings us to where modified atmosphere comes in. It's a supplement to temperature control. It's a supplement to minimizing the wounding that occurs, because modified atmosphere further reduces the rate of those chemical reactions. So, modified or controlled atmospheres. These are two names for very similar technologies in that they both refer to reducing the oxygen level and increasing the CO2 level compared to the normal air. But modified atmosphere is a system that relies on the respiration rate of the fruits or vegetables to change the oxygen and CO2, where the controlled atmosphere, in contrast, is a system where the oxygen and CO2 are purposely changed and monitored and adjusted over time, and is usually used in large storage facilities like CA storage of apples. So we're talking about, as I said, reducing the oxygen, increasing the carbon dioxide, removing ethylenes can be involved. The presence or absence of feedback control is really what differentiates modified atmosphere from controlled atmosphere. So CA is more precise than MA. So the gases of interest, oxygen. Oxygen is very chemically reactive. It's required to support aerobic metabolism, meaning respiration. It's involved in oxidative enzyme reactions, oxidative browning. Ethylene biosynthesis requires oxygen. You have the reactive oxygen species that I mentioned earlier. Those are different forms of oxygen. So if you reduce the oxygen, you're starving all of these reactions for their substrate. Carbon dioxide is very soluble in water. It acidifies aqueous solutions. You heard Dennis Kostadius mention something about that. It inhibits microbial growth, and it also competitively inhibits ethylene action. Like I was describing for the 1-MCP, binding to the ethylene binding site, CO2 does the same thing, not as effectively, much more weakly, but that's why you have to keep CO2 from building up in a ripening room, because it'll counteract the effect of the ethylene that you're trying to use to ripen your bananas or mangoes or avocados. So those are all effects of elevated CO2. And then you have water vapor as part of the system as well. It needs to be near saturation, because when you start processing fruits and vegetables into fresh cut, you're increasing the tendency for them to lose water, because you're breaking the surface barrier that normally is helping contain the water inside the tissue. So inside the modified atmosphere package, it needs to be saturated, but you don't want condensation. And that's a topic that Jeff Brandenburg will take up and talk about more. So, MA slows down respiration and other metabolic processes because of the relationship of oxygen and CO2 to the respiratory process. So like I said before, if you reduce oxygen, you're starving the process. If you increase CO2, it actually has some sort of feedback inhibition and also slows the process. Here's a couple of illustrations that show that relationship between oxygen concentration and CO2 concentration and respiration rate. So with the relative rate of respiration over here and the oxygen concentration going down, you see there's a decrease in respiration. Eventually, though, you reach a point where you start to stimulate fermentative metabolism, and the produce will shift over into anaerobic respiration and start to produce alcohol. You get a similar effect with CO2. In this case, as you increase the CO2, you can have a decrease in respiration in terms of oxygen consumption, but also it'll stimulate an increase in fermentative metabolism, illustrated by the acetaldehyde and ethanol concentration increasing. So besides slowing down respiration, it reduces sensitivity to ethylene at either lower than 8% oxygen approximately or higher than 1% CO2. It slows down ripening, aging, all those senescence processes that I talked about before. And it also can inhibit microbial growth. Especially high CO2 has antimicrobial properties. Not all fruits and vegetables can tolerate high enough CO2 to get into that antimicrobial range, but when they can tolerate it, it's often included as part of the MAP system for that reason. So what about potential risks with MAP? Let me start off with the caveat that these should only be things that you encounter when the MAP is mismanaged or poorly designed. So this is the whole point of designing a modified atmosphere package system, is you want it to be at the most extreme atmosphere that the produce can tolerate in order to have the maximum benefits that I mentioned, but not so extreme that it starts to damage the tissue and cause problems. So MAP can result in off flavors or odors if anaerobic respiration or fermentative metabolism occurs, and that can be initiated either by too low oxygen or too high CO2. The anaerobic atmospheres can also allow pathogenic microbes to proliferate, so another reason why those should be avoided. Too high CO2 also can result directly in tissue injury. And in general, you have to remember that the MA can't compensate for poor temperature control. It's a supplement to good temperature control. But if you don't start off with the proper temperature, the MA is not going to save your product. So how does it work? Modified atmosphere packaging, or MAP, is a system that restricts the gas diffusion in and out of the package so that the atmosphere inside the package is modified in terms of reducing oxygen and elevating the CO2, as well as capturing and containing the water vapor. So you can do that using semi-permeable films that by their chemical properties will allow oxygen and CO2 to move through the film at different rates. You can have microporous films that have materials incorporated into the film that make very small microscopic air passageways for the gases to move through. You can use microporous patches, which are also used to some extent. Or you can have perforations where you actually have physical holes in the film that are small enough to restrict the gas diffusion, but large enough to allow the gases to move in and out. And so what happens when you design the system properly is there's going to be a balance between the oxygen consumption and CO2 production by the produce due to its respiration, and the movement of the oxygen from outside into the package and the movement of CO2 from inside the package out. And eventually what happens is it's going to reach a steady state or a state of equilibrium where those processes are balanced and the gases are moving in and out of the package at the same rate that the produce is producing or consuming the gases. And that's where you get the modified atmosphere. This is actually a very simplified example of how you would go about designing a modified atmosphere package. And Jeff tells me it's very simplified, extremely simplified. But this is how you would determine the oxygen transmission rate or the CO2 transmission rate that you require in your package. You have to know the respiration rate of the product. You have to designate a film thickness. You have to know the product weight and the surface area for gas exchange that's available in the package. So that's going to have some restrictions. You want a package that's minimal size to contain the amount of product that's inside. So the weight and the surface area are sort of interrelated. And you also, importantly, you have to know what your target oxygen and CO2 concentrations are in the package that you're going to use. So the permeability, or the oxygen transmission rate, is going to be the permeability of the whole package in that equation. And the respiration rate is the respiration rate of the product at the desired temperature and atmosphere. You can find a lot of published respiration rates, but they're usually always in air. And at the optimum modified atmosphere, they're going to be lower than that. So you actually have to know what that respiration rate is. You have to realize that the calculated OTR and CO2 TR are per mil of film thickness. So if you change the thickness, it's going to have a direct effect on the transmission rate, gas transmission rate. You can find conversion factors for different gas permeability units in this handout. Are there handouts being provided as well? Yes? They're online, okay. So that's one of your handouts that's going to be available online. So if you go through just an example like this, I won't go into the details because that's not really important. You specify the parameters, you go through the calculation. In this case, it comes up with an OTR of this amount, 0.03472. Use a conversion from the handout chapter, and you get 537 cc's per mil per 100 square inches package area per day. And it just so happens, not by chance, that the OTR of low-density polyethylene happens to be about 500 cc's per mil per 100 square inches per day. So you could actually come up with a package that would equilibrate at 5% oxygen for whatever this product is that respires at that rate using a 1 mil thick low-density polyethylene. In reality, the packages are much more complex than that. You have multi-layer films. You have packages that have both semi-permeable film and microporous patches and all sorts of combinations so that you can get a myriad of different equilibrium atmospheres. So, some more principles of MAP. I don't think it's been mentioned up till now, but there's a concept called the Q10, which is how you can express the effect of temperature on respiration rate. And for most produce, the Q10 is about 2 to 4. That means that for every 10-degree difference in temperature, the respiration rate is going to change by 2 to 4-fold. So 2 times higher to 4 times higher if the temperature is 10 degrees higher. Films don't respond to temperature nearly as sensitively. So the Q10 for most films is only 1.2 to 1.3. It's about 1 for perforations within the temperature range that we deal with in produce handling. So much less than the change in respiration rate of the product. So that means that the produce respiration rate changes much more with temperature than the film permeability. So the MAP can't maintain the beneficial atmosphere when the products are exposed to higher temperatures than what the MAP was designed for. So for example, you typically have lower storage and transport temperatures than the temperatures at the retail level. So when product in MAP is put out on display in a store, it's going to be exposed to higher temperatures. And what's going to happen? The respiration rate is going to go up and outstrip the ability of the package to allow the gas exchange. You'll start getting too low oxygen, too high CO2. And so that causes problems. So there's a couple of ways that people address this. One is that you design the MAP for the storage transport conditions only, and you open it up. You remove the packaging, usually at the DC. So carton liners, the pallet shroud type of approach, that comes off at the DC, and there's no more MAP going forward to retail. That's one way to deal with that problem. Another way to deal with the problem is to compromise. Design the package for an intermediate temperature. Maybe you've got a salad that should be held at 0 degrees, but at retail it may be exposed to as high as 15 degrees, which is not uncommon. So you actually design your package for 7 degrees. So it's not doing as much as it could during transportation, but it's not going to go bad so quickly if it's exposed to extremely high temperatures later on. Another part of MAP is the idea of passive MAP and active MAP. Passive MAP just means you let the respiration rate establish the atmosphere over time. Active MAP means that during the sealing process, you pull a vacuum, flush, and fill the bag as it's being sealed with an atmosphere that is what you expect the equilibrium atmosphere to be. So it's at that atmosphere right from the start. So that rapidly establishes the atmosphere. It's very important for things that tend to have browning problems because getting the oxygen down low quickly is very important. And this is just an illustration of that, showing that it can literally take a week for a passive MAP to reach its equilibrium, whereas with the active MAP, it's there right from the start. So another aspect of this is an idea called the permeability ratio or beta ratio. Fruits and vegetables have a respiratory quotient of about 1, meaning that they produce CO2 at about the same rate that they consume oxygen. If you compare that to the ratio of permeability of CO2 and oxygen, there's a lot of variability available among different packaging materials, which gives you a lot of potentially different atmospheres that can be established. So perforations have a ratio of about 0.8. Films mostly vary in the range of 4 to 6, being more permeable to CO2 than to oxygen. So if you have a film with a permeability of 4, you could get combinations of CO2 and oxygen that follow this line. A perforation-based film is going to follow a line like this. So you can see right away you can get higher CO2 if that's what you desire. And then you can come up, like I said before, with combinations of multiple layers of different films or a combination of a microperforated patch in a film, and you can come up with ratios in between. And so it's possible to get almost any gas combination you like. So it's something like this. If you have a film with a higher beta ratio, CO2 is moving faster than oxygen, you might be able to get a combination of 4% oxygen plus 3% CO2, which would be achieved with a film with a ratio of about 5.6. Or if you have microperforated film, this is not really microperforated, it's just a picture that shows holes that are much bigger than this, 40 to 200 micrometers in diameter. So they allow development of a higher CO2 atmosphere. So you get something like this, you could get potentially an atmosphere, say 6% oxygen, 18.5% CO2, which is what you could get with a beta ratio of 0.8, like I mentioned. And then there's microporous MAP systems. That can be the major route for gas exchange, or it can be part of a more complicated MAP system. Microporous means micro in microporous means 0.2 to 3 micrometers, so much smaller than the 40 to 200 for perforations. The pores are usually created in films by incorporating materials into the film that create micro passageways for gases to move. In the patches, the patch is a porous material, and the pores are created in the extrusion process when they're making the patch. So microporous films tend to have sort of a cloudy appearance because of the material that's incorporated into the plastic. And there's commercial examples of that. This is a system that probably a lot of you are familiar with, the Appio Breatheway system, or they market it also as Eat Smart products. This is a film bag with a microporous patch over a hole in the bag. So the main gas exchange goes through the patch. Added to that, they put a resin polymer coating the patch. And what's neat about that is they create a resin that changes phase between liquid and solid at a certain chosen temperature. right? So like 0 degrees is the phase change temperature from ice to water. And as you go above the temperature, you get the change to liquid. The same thing happens with the resin, which changes the permeability. So it's another approach to overcoming that temperature fluctuation issue that you can have with MAP. And then there's a lot of other things that can go into a system, making it active MAP or intelligent MAP, and that's Jeff Brandenburg's business. I'll let him get into all of these: ethylene scrubbing, CO2 absorbent, desiccants, antimicrobials, aroma release, monitoring of the package environment while it's going through the distribution system. All of those are things that have been created and may be available, may be used to more or less extent. And I'm just going to finish up with this slide showing how you get extended shelf life with a treatment like MAP. So all you're doing with the MAP system, this is showing a quality rating for a product, and we're saying that the minimum acceptable quality is 5. So how many days does it take to reach a rating of 5 between the two systems? About 4 or 5 days in air, 10, 11 days in MAP, just this made up example. But my point here is that you don't need to go out to the long shelf life period to see the benefits of a technology like MAP, because it's slowing the rate of quality decline. So within any time frame, even if your system only requires 4 or 5 days, it'll still be higher quality because you slowed the rate of deterioration. And that's it. Thank you very much.